Dress shirts owe their great appearance and fit to the quality of the fabrics and the attention to detail in assembly. The choice of the stitching and the use of interlinings are also extremely important in achieving a smooth appearance that is free from puckering. Offline assembly of collar and cuffs, the engineering of a placket for smoothness, and the insertion of buttons and buttonholes also distinguish dress shirts from most other cut and sewn garments. The assembly of the collar, the sleeves, the yoke, the placket, and the front and back panels is very precise, with multiple layers of fabric being sewn at many points. Inspections occur throughout the process. Now let's take a look at how dress shirts are assembled. Little variation occurs in the construction of men's shirts. Many construction processes are automated and as a result are likely to consistently produce a more superior garment. For dress shirts, the entire sleeve is processed in one workstation on the UPS line. The operations performed are set placket, box the placket, fold the end under and top stitch, and then button sew and buttonhole placket, approximately halfway down the sleeve opening. The close-up of box sleeve placket shows the difficulty of the task. For this reason, the operation is a frequent prospect for automation. The sleeves are then ready to attach to the garment because the cuffs cannot be attached until after side seaming. The collar assembly consists of the collar itself, plus two pattern pieces called bands that provide shape, support, and rigidity to the collar once it is on the shirt. The collar is made of 2-ply of fabric plus an interlining and is then turned and pressed before being joined to the two bands, which have also been reinforced with a lining. The lining on each of the components can be sewn in or may have been attached using a heat-activated adhesive. Sew lining and hemband is an operation to provide stiffness to the band and provide a finished edge on the inside of the shirt when the collar assembly is set. The set band operation attaches two bands to the made collar from the center outwards in order to assure evenness of the band ends and the centering of the collar on the shirt after being set. The operator may shape the end of the bands as a separate motion, or even use a template in order to maintain the desired shape. For a manual set and close collar, the back band must be longer than the previously hemmed front band. Once the bands are set, they must be turned with the face side out and creased in order to facilitate edge stitching, which is very narrow top stitching. Depending upon the fabric, the operator may need to use a pointing device and a heat press for turn band. The narrow top stitching in edge stitch band is performed on a single needle lock stitch machine and provides support for the entire assembly. In order to allow easy setting of the band collar assembly to the shirt, the stitch must begin approximately 1/8 of an inch above the point at which the two bands join. This gap will allow a subsequent operator to hide the corner of the shirt inside the band. Once the bands are edge-stitched, a consistent width of the finished collar assembly is assured by running the assembly through a machine without a needle, but equipped with a side cutting device. After this trim band operation, the band collar assembly is now ready to be attached to the shirt. The inner cuff ply has the inside edge hemmed before the cuff is assembled. This operation is performed on a single needle lock stitch machine that is equipped with a folder that turns the edge of the band and allows the insertion of the lining as the hem is sewn. The lining is fed into the machine from a roll located under the table. The hemmed cuffs must be clipped apart and stacked before the next operation. Make cuff is one of the operations that is frequently automated. Some of the variations in the final shirt are changes in buttons or buttonholes for cufflinks. Once the operator loads the pieces of cuff fabric and a lining into the machine, the multiple lobes will sew the cuff pieces together, trim the margins to the appropriate width, clip the corners, and then offload them into a stack. The cuffs must still be turned right side out and top stitched before being sent to the assembly area. After the cuff is made, it must be turned right side out and pressed to shape. This turn and press cuff operation is performed on a two-blade machine, which allows the operator to turn and position one cuff while the previously positioned cuff is being pressed. The temperature and the time of the press is determined by the fabric of the shirt. The buttonhole cuff operation is performed on a tandem machine setup because of the long sew and cut time of the buttonhole machine. The operator works on two different bundles at the same time. While one buttonhole is sewing, the operator can load a cuff from the other bundle. This is possible because the machine clamps the cuff to a plate on the bottom of the machine during the sew cycle. Once the sewing is complete, the machine cuts a slit in the cuff precisely between the two rows of stitches. Buttonholes can be sewn with either a lock stitch or a chain stitch. The button sew cuff operation is very similar to this setup. However, because the sew time is much shorter, the operator can only work with one bundle at a time. Cuffs are still handled while tied in a bundle, and the operator folds the end of the cuff down below the bed of the machine after the button is attached, and then positions the next cuff. This is frequently done using both hands in order to speed the process. Preparation of the back for assembly involves approximately 3 separate motions: set label to yoke, form and stitch box pleat, and set yoke to back. In the combined operation, all motions are performed with a single needle lock stitch machine. The label designates the custom manufacturer of these shirts. The placement for the pleat is typically designated by notches and then held in place with a stay stitch. Setting the yoke involves aligning the outside yoke with the back and then positioning the inside yoke. This involves sewing 3-ply of material, which is difficult to do without causing pucker in the seam. In some sewing establishments, these would be performed as individual operations. The two operations that might see significant improvement would be label set, which could possibly be done with an automatic tacker, and set yoke, which is performed using a table that moves in conjunction with the sewing machine to reduce pucker. Top stitch yoke gives a more finished appearance to the back of the garment. The single needle lock stitch will provide some stability when the back and the yoke fabric are cut with the grain line running in different directions. The internal seam will consequently be held in the same orientation across the back of the shirt, improving appearance. The left and right front are treated individually because one must support the buttonholes and therefore has an interlining, and the other hold the buttons. The button side, the right side on a man's shirt, is called the underfront and will hold the personalized label on these shirts. The operations for both fronts may be done at one multi-machine workstation on a UPS line. Hem underfront, or button piece, is designed to give the front a finished edge, as well as provide 2-ply of fabric to support the button stitch. The front is put into a folder of the appropriate width, and then sewn with a single needle lock stitch machine. 2 rollers at the rear of the machine are connected to the sewing machine with a belt and provide a puller to ensure a consistent feed of the fabric through the machine. When shirts are sewn in a bundle operation, leaving the thread chain attached from the top of one garment to the bottom of the next allows the puller to transition between the fronts without operator assistance. The operator inserts a care and content label during this operation, which positions the label on the innermost portion of the finished shirt. A piece of interlining is attached to the left front of the garment to provide a crisp look to the front of the shirt, as well as provide support for the buttonholes. Set top center lining can involve simply attaching the lining with a folded outside edge or a specially designed folder to form a pleated look to the front. In either case, the lining is fed through the machine from a roll, and the edge of the shirt front is fed through a folder and sewn to the lining. For this shirt, a small single turn folder attached to the foot of the machine tucks the fabric under and positions it on top of the lining, leaving a folded edge to show inside the garment. A soft plastic wheel positioned behind the needle is synchronized with the sewing machine and pulls the fabric from under the foot at the appropriate speed. Once the interlining is set to the shirt, it is folded to the inside. Fold and iron top front turns the leading edge under and then is creased with a hand iron to form a straight edge. The resulting double fold gives 3-ply of fabric and the interlining to support the buttonholes and give rigidity to the front of the shirt. A clip and stack front operation is required after the hem or stitch front operation when the shirts are sewn in a bundle configuration. The clip and stack is considerably more efficient than handling the garments individually at the front operation. It is most useful after an automatic operation where it can provide an inspection point to detect any machine problems that were not noticed by the loader of the machine. Buttonhole and button sew fronts is performed at one workstation with machines that are set up with automatic indexers. The operator positions the shirt for the first location, and after that step is complete, the machine will automatically slide the front or index to the next location. Because the actual sew time is roughly twice as long, the buttonhole machine will be loaded and activated first. The combined cycle time of that machine will allow the operator to turn and load the button side of the garment. The distance between the buttons or buttonholes can be quickly changed by adjusting a mechanical stop or a computer setting, depending upon the sophistication of the machine. The buttons are automatically fed into the machine from a vibrating hopper, which can orient the buttons right side up. When the top center front is simply folded at the leading edge, a hold stitch is sometimes required to ease the difficulty of setting the collar. Stay stitch and trim top center is done with a single needle lock stitch machine. Once the garment is handled, it is also fairly inexpensive to also secure the bottom of the front to help the hem bottom operator. Match and trim fronts is performed before to ensure that the fronts, even with different turnbacks, are the same length. Exact matching can aid both the set collar operator and the bottom hem operator. The fronts will then even at the bottom front of the shirt, and the evenness is important for the placement of the pocket. The top of the patch pocket must be hemmed along the opening. The shirt style determines the shape of the pocket and the stitch line of the hem. When this hem shape is consistent across many styles and capital is available, the hem pocket may be performed by an automatic machine. The operator positions the pocket in the loading station from which the machine moves the material through fold top, stitch hem, and stack. Pockets are then ready to be set to the front. Automatic pocket set is performed while the fronts are still separate entities. The pocket is typically measured from the high point of the shoulder and from the center edge of the front. Therefore, it is typically the last operation performed on the front. Virtually all pockets are set by programmable equipment because of the difficulty of the manual sewing operation, especially the triangular sewing at the top edges of the pocket. The folding components of the machine are quite expensive, and thus companies try to limit the variation in the shape and dimensions of pockets offered. The first operation in the assembly process is join shoulders. Because the top of the back has been completed with an inside and an outside yoke, the join operator must attach the single front to 2 back yokes. This is performed by inserting each of the yokes into an in-turn folder to position the edge of the yoke inside the finished assembly. The front is then inserted between the 2 yokes with the raw edge inside, secured by a single needle lock stitch. Thus, the term for this specific method is folder join shoulders. The roller behind the needle helps to keep the 3-ply seam pucker free. Less expensive shirts may use an overedge machine and have the seam visible on the inside of the garment. The set collar operation is a very precise operation. Not only must the operator sew a relatively stiff straight edge of the band collar assembly to the curved opening of the neckline, but the ends of the collar must be accurately positioned to facilitate the collar being turned and stitched closed. While sewing across the back of the shirt, the operator must contend with the 2 plies of fabric. The single needle lock stitch machine uses a fairly narrow seam margin in order to reduce the amount of puckering as the collar conforms to the scoop of the neckline. Once the collar assembly is set and closed, the top button and buttonhole can be applied. Both of these are performed on the band portion of the collar assembly, but due to the closeness of the set collar seam, they cannot be done in the parts department. The buttonhole band operation is done first, and the placement of the hole is controlled by an edge gauge set up for the collar band style. The operator will manually mark the center of the hole and then button sew the band at that location. Attaching the sleeve to this particular shirt is a two-pass activity. The set sleeve portion is done with a single needle lock stitch, and the top stitch portion with a single needle chain stitch machine. In many bundle factories, they would be performed by two different operators. However, combining the operations into the same workstation, as done in this factory, may improve the quality of the end product by eliminating the transfer of blame from one operator to another. Many shirts have the sleeve and side seam operation performed using a safety stitch machine, and consequently this shirt would be designated as having a single needle set sleeve. Set SN sleeve requires that the sleeve be offset from the body of the shirt to leave enough fabric to be turned under during the top stitching operation. The fact that these are two opposing curves requires the operator to be continually manipulating the parts to maintain a consistent seam margin. A folder device that provides an edge stop for each ply of fabric aids the operator. Any excess fabric along the shoulder of the garment should be trimmed off as a separate operation, or be performed by this operator before the sleeve is set. Top stitch sleeve set requires a folder that turns up and over the excess fabric from the sleeve to be mounted to the machine table. After the fabric is inserted into the folder, the operator must utilize an edge guide mounted to the sewing machine foot to accurately stitch the correct margin. Trim and inspect before side seam is a cost-saving measure utilized because of the difficulty of repairing component pieces after the side seam has been closed. A cautionary note is that these same areas should not be inspected during the final inspection unless some subsequent operation is performed to the main body pieces. Single needle close and side seam is performed on a single needle lock stitch machine. The designation, again, is important because many shirts are closed using either a safety stitch seam or a felled seam. The operator closes the body of the shirt by joining the front to the back, and also closes the length of the sleeve. In this case, the operator matches the sleeve set seam before positioning the shirt at the needle, because that is one of the stated quality inspection points. After matching, the front is positioned into a single fold folder, which folds approximately 1/4 inch of fabric over the back. The operator must feed the appropriate amount of fabric into the folder throughout the entire seam. This becomes a little more difficult at the sleeve set seam. In order to be durable, the single needle side seam must be top stitched. The top stitch side seam and hem fronts operation on this shirt also incorporates bottom hemming the front panels of the shirt. The entire operation is performed with a single needle lock stitch machine, which has a very small folder built into the foot of the machine. Because of the tight nature of the finished hem, it is frequently called a baby hem. The operator must manually insert the fabric into the folder for the hemming operations, but only uses the foot as a guide while top stitching the side seam of the body and the sleeve. The back panel must have been hemmed before the side seam operation. The close quarters of the interior of the sleeve make this a tedious task. Many shirts have a continuous hem around the bottom. If the fold of the material and the seam width is wider, then it can be hemmed as a swing folder hem. The operator must manually fold both the beginning and the end of the hem at the edge of the front panels, and then swing the folder into place and hem the majority of the garment in a very quick motion. Once the side seam has been closed, the cuffs can be set on the shirt. As a finished assembly from the parts department, each cuff has a hemmed or finished edge and a raw edge. During the set cuff operation, the operator will sew the cuff to the shirt utilizing the raw extended edge of the cuff. If there are any pleats to be put in the sleeve, they will be folded in at this time. In this case, again noting quality improvements, the same operator will perform the close cuff or top stitch cuff set operation. The operator must turn the cuff to the final position and then tuck the set cuff seam into the interior of the cuff, making sure that all edges are squared up with the sleeve. The top stitch, as well as the set operation, are done with a single needle lock stitch. Final trim and examine removes all threads resulting from the operations performed since the previous inspection. Some of these may be cut with snips, while some may be loose. The inspector will look at each of the seams for accuracy and also be watching for any fabric defects or soil that may have gotten on the garment. The finished garment is put through a 3-step finishing process. The spot press operator presses the parts of the shirt that will show in the final packaging that will not be affected by the form cabinet press. The areas of concern, and therefore pressed, are the left cuff, which will be folded on the outside of the garment, and the bottom hem, which tends to show roping because of the curves of the garment, especially around the side seam. The majority of the shirt is pressed during the form press operation. The shirt is placed on a form which expands to the appropriate size. The form is then put into a heated steam tunnel or into a chamber where heated external forms apply pressure. The shirt is automatically offloaded and stacked. Press, collar, and fold is the final operation before the garment is bagged and sent to the customer. The fold table is configured for a particular style and includes a heated neck form, which expands to press the neckline plus a board onto which the shirt is folded. On the appropriate styles, the folder inserts collar stays into the provided pockets before positioning the shirt on the collar press. Collar strips, butterflies, cardboard, tissue paper, and pins will be inserted into the garment as instructed. Long sleeve shirts typically have one sleeve folded to the outside and pinned in place. The bagging and shipping instructions depend upon the customer.